Picture this. A man gets thrown in a prison cell, stripped of his title, stripped of his money, stripped of everything he ever built. His body gets racked on a torture device called the strappado, arms yanked behind his back, yanked so hard his shoulders damn near pop out of socket. He's got nothing. No job, no power, no friends left who'll answer his letters. Broke as a joke, sitting in the dirt outside Florence, in a farmhouse he can barely keep the lights on in. And that man goes on to write one of the most feared, most studied, most straight-up ruthless books on power in human history. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli, and here's the twist that's gonna mess with your head for the rest of this video. The guy who taught kings, presidents, CEOs, and cold-blooded hustlers how to seize power wrote his masterpiece while he had nothing. Nothing but the clothes on his back and a mind that refused, point-blank refused, to think like a poor man. Because here's what nobody tells you. Poor ain't a bank account number. Poor is a mindset. And if you let that mindset creep into your head while you're down bad, you're done. Game over. You'll stay broke forever, even if money falls in your lap tomorrow. So stick around, because in the next few minutes, we're gonna break down exactly what Machiavelli knew about scarcity, about power, about perception, and about turning absolutely nothing into everything. This ain't your average motivational fluff, y'all. This is cold, calculated, real talk psychology from one of the most dangerous minds to ever put ink on paper. Let's get into it. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to The Hidden Mind, the channel where we dig into the darkest, sharpest, most brutally honest lessons from history's greatest thinkers and apply them straight to your life today. If this is your first time pulling up, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now, because we drop content like this that's designed to rewire the way you think about money, power, and the game of life. Before we dive in, I need you to do me a solid. If this video hits different for you, smash that like button. It takes 2 seconds, but it tells the algorithm to put this in front of more people who need to hear it. Drop a comment down below and let me know where you're watching from and what being broke actually taught you, because I read every single one of them. Share this with somebody in your circle who's going through it right now, somebody who needs this energy today. And if you really want to ride with the channel, if you want to go the extra mile, there's a super thanks button right under this video. Hit that, and you're directly fueling more content like this. Every bit helps us keep this thing running and free for everybody. All right, let's get into the mind of Machiavelli, and let's talk about why you should never, and I mean never, let yourself think you're poor, even when you got nothing left. Chapter 1. The difference between broke and poor. Let's get one thing straight from the jump. There's a massive difference between being broke and being poor, and most people never learn this distinction their whole lives. Broke is a situation. It's temporary. It's a number in your bank account, a bill you can't pay this month, a job you just lost. Broke is circumstantial. Broke happens to everybody at some point. Kings, hustlers, CEOs, your grandma, everybody. Even Machiavelli himself, a man who once negotiated with kings and popes, got so broke he had to borrow money just to keep his family fed. Poor though, poor is a mentality. Poor is a belief system that convinces you that lack is permanent, that scarcity defines who you are, that you'll never have more because you don't deserve more. Poor is when you start making decisions from a place of fear instead of strategy. And here's the wild part. You can have millions in the bank and still think poor. You can have absolutely nothing to your name and still think rich. Machiavelli understood this better than almost anybody in history because he lived it. In 1512, the Medici family came back to power in Florence, and they didn't trust him one bit. He'd worked for the Florentine Republic for over a decade, built relationships with kings and generals across Europe, and in one swift political move, all of it got ripped away. He got fired from his post, accused of conspiracy, thrown in prison, tortured, and then exiled to a small farm outside the city with basically nothing to his name. Now here's where most men would have broken. Here's where most people would have curled up, accepted the poor label, and let it define the rest of their days. But Machiavelli didn't do that. Instead, he sat down every single night, put on his best clothes, his regal and courtly garments as he called them, even though he was broke as hell, and he wrote. He treated his mind like it still belonged in the halls of power, even while his body sat in a run-down farmhouse. That's the difference right there. He was broke. He refused to be poor. And that distinction, that one mental shift, is exactly what separates the people who bounce back from hardship and come back stronger versus the people who stay stuck in that same spot for years, sometimes for life. Look, I get it. When the bills are piling up, when you're staring at an empty fridge, when your phone's blowing up with collection calls, it's easy, real easy, to let that scarcity mindset take over. It's easy to start thinking small, acting small, believing small. But that's exactly the trap Machiavelli is warning us about across his entire body of work. The second you accept poor as your identity, instead of broke as your current situation, you've already lost the game before you even had a real shot at winning it. Chapter 2. Machiavelli's own story of hitting rock bottom. Let's rewind and really sit with what this man went through, because it's wild how much we can learn from his actual life story, not just his writing. Niccolo Machiavelli was born in 1469 into a family that wasn't exactly rolling in dough. His father was a lawyer, but not a particularly successful one, and the family struggled financially for most of Niccolo's childhood. Despite that, young Machiavelli got a solid education, soaked up the classics, studied history, studied politics, and eventually landed a government gig in Florence at 29 years old. For 14 years, this dude was at the center of power. He negotiated with kings of France. He met face-to-face with Cesare Borgia, one of the most ruthless and calculating power players of the Italian Renaissance. He observed popes scheming, princes betraying each other, armies rising and falling. He was, in a sense, living inside the machine of power itself, taking mental notes the entire time. Then, in 1512, everything collapsed. The Medici family retook Florence with the backing of Spanish troops, and the republic that Machiavelli served fell apart. He lost his job immediately. Worse than that, in 1513, he got accused, falsely, most historians believe, of being involved in a conspiracy to overthrow the Medici. He got arrested and tortured with the strappado, that brutal device where they tie your hands behind your back and hoist you up by a rope, dislocating your shoulders in the process. He endured that torture 4 times and never confessed to anything, because honestly, there was nothing to confess. Eventually, he got released, but he wasn't free. He was banished from Florence, banned from holding any political office, and forced to retreat to a small family property in the countryside called Sant'Andrea in Percusina. This wasn't some peaceful countryside retirement, y'all. This was exile. This was a man who'd spent his whole adult life whispering in the ears of kings and popes, suddenly reduced to managing a small farm, playing cards with butchers and millers in the local tavern just to pass the time. He wrote a letter to his friend Francesco Vettori, describing his daily routine, and it's honestly one of the most humbling, most human things you'll ever read. He talks about spending his mornings checking on woodcutters, playing dice games at a local inn, arguing with the butcher and the innkeeper over petty stuff, just to kill time. Then at night, he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, he'd take off his everyday muddy clothes, put on his old formal robes, the ones fit for a royal court, and he'd sit down at his desk. In his mind, in that ritual, he was stepping back into the world of kings and statesmen, even though his body never left that little farmhouse. That's when he wrote The Prince, broke, exiled, tortured, humiliated, cut off from the world of power he loved. And instead of writing a book about bitterness or defeat, he wrote arguably the most influential political text in Western history, a book still read, still taught, still quoted, 500 years later in business schools, war rooms, and political offices across the entire planet. Let that marinate for a second. The man had nothing, absolutely nothing, and he produced one of the greatest works of strategic thinking the world has ever seen. Why? Because he refused to let his circumstances shrink his mind. He kept dressing for the throne room even when he was sitting in a farmhouse. He kept thinking like a man of power, even when he had none. Chapter 3. Perception is everything. How you appear matters more than what you have. Now, let's talk about one of the core ideas running through Machiavelli's entire philosophy, and it's something that applies directly to how you handle being broke. Perception is power. In The Prince, Machiavelli writes about how rulers are judged by the masses based on appearances, not on the truth of who they really are behind closed doors. He straight up says that most people go through life judging with their eyes rather than their hands, meaning they believe what they see on the surface, not what's actually happening underneath. And a smart ruler, a smart operator, understands this and uses it to their advantage. Now apply that to your life right now. When you're going through a broke season, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is broadcasting your desperation to the entire world. I'm not saying lie to people. I'm not saying fake a lifestyle you can't afford. That's a whole different trap we'll talk about in a minute. What I'm saying is this: how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you show up, shapes how the world treats you, and, more importantly, shapes how you treat yourself. Think about it like this. If you walk into a room slouched over, mumbling, apologizing for existing, broadcasting, "I got nothing, I'm nobody, don't expect much from me," guess what? People pick up on that energy immediately, and they start treating you accordingly. Opportunities slide right past you because you don't look like someone who can handle them. But if you walk into that same room with your shoulders back, speaking with intention, carrying yourself like a person who's simply in a temporary rough patch on their way to something bigger, people respond to that completely differently. They lean in, they give you a chance, they see potential instead of pity. This is exactly what Machiavelli did in that farmhouse. Physically, materially, he was cooked. No cap, dude had nothing. But every single night, he put on those formal robes and sat at his desk, like a statesman, conducting the affairs of nations. He wasn't performing for anybody else, because nobody was watching him alone in that farmhouse. He was performing for himself. He was training his own mind to keep operating at the level he intended to return to, instead of shrinking down to match his current circumstances. That's the lesson, y'all. Your current bank account is not your identity. Your current job situation is not your ceiling. The way you think about yourself, the way you carry yourself, the standards you hold for yourself, even when nobody's watching, that's what determines whether you stay stuck in that rut or whether you climb your way back out. Here's a real, practical way to apply this today. Dress like the version of you that already made it, even if it's just for yourself. Speak to yourself the way a mentor would speak to a promising protege, not the way a bully talks to a failure. Keep your space clean. Keep your word to yourself. Keep small disciplines intact, even when the big picture feels like it's falling apart. Because those small acts of dignity are training your brain to reject the poor identity and hold on to the temporarily broke, permanently capable identity instead. Chapter 4. The Trap of Scarcity. Thinking. All right, let's get real about something that wrecks more people than actual poverty ever could, and that's scarcity thinking. This is the mental trap where lack becomes the lens through which you view literally everything. Scarcity thinking sounds like this: I can't afford to take that risk. I can't afford to invest in myself right now. There's not enough opportunity out there for someone like me. People like me don't get breaks like that. Sound familiar? We've all had these thoughts creep in during our lowest points. The problem isn't having the thought once. The problem is when you let that thought become your operating system. Machiavelli, in a roundabout way, warns against exactly this kind of thinking throughout his work. He talks constantly about the concept of virtù, and no, that doesn't just mean virtue in the moral sense like we use it in English today. Virtù, in Machiavelli's world, meant skill, strength, boldness, the ability to seize opportunity and shape your own fate through sheer will and cunning. It's the opposite of sitting back and waiting for the world to hand you something. A man trapped in scarcity thinking has zero virtù. He waits. He hesitates. He tells himself a story about why he can't, why it's not his time, why the deck is stacked against him. And listen, sometimes the deck genuinely is stacked against you. Life ain't fair, and anybody who tells you different is selling something. But here's the thing Machiavelli understood deep in his bones. Unfair circumstances don't excuse you from playing the game with everything you've got. If anything, they demand it even more. Let's break down what scarcity thinking actually costs you, because it's more than just missed opportunities. It costs you your negotiating power. When you're desperate, you accept the first offer, whatever it is, because you're terrified there won't be another one. People smell desperation, and predatory folks, and trust me, there's plenty of them out there, will absolutely take advantage of that energy. It costs you your creativity. A scarcity mindset narrows your focus down to survival, tunnel vision, just getting through today. But some of the biggest breakthroughs, the biggest hustles, the biggest comebacks in history happened because someone with nothing to lose got creative out of necessity. Necessity really is the mother of invention, but only if you let it push you toward creative solutions instead of freezing you up in fear. It costs you relationships. When you're stuck in poor mode, you either isolate yourself out of shame or you become the person who's always asking for something, always complaining, always bringing negative energy into every room. Both of those approaches burn bridges you're gonna need later. And maybe worst of all, scarcity thinking costs you your own self-respect. It convinces you that you're less than, that you don't deserve good things, that you should settle. And once that belief sets in deep, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You stop trying for the bigger opportunities, because deep down, you've already decided you're not worthy of them. Machiavelli flipped that script entirely. Sitting in that farmhouse, broke and exiled, he didn't write a single word about how unfair life had been to him. Well, okay, he complained a little in his letters. He was human after all. But his actual work, The Prince, wasn't a pity party. It was a masterclass in strategy, in seizing opportunity, in understanding power dynamics so thoroughly that even 5 centuries later, world leaders still study it. He took his rock bottom and turned it into his most legendary output. That's what refusing scarcity thinking looks like in action. Not ignoring your reality, but refusing to let that reality shrink your ambition. Chapter 5. Fortuna and Virtue. What you can actually control. Now let's get into one of the deepest, most powerful concepts in all of Machiavelli's writing, because this right here is the key that unlocks everything else we've talked about so far. It's the relationship between fortuna and virtù. Fortuna, to Machiavelli, represents fortune, luck, chance, all the stuff in life that's completely outside of your control. The family you were born into, the economy you graduate into, a global pandemic that wrecks your business overnight, a boss who lays you off for reasons that have nothing to do with your performance. That's fortuna. And Machiavelli was crystal clear that fortuna controls a massive chunk of what happens in our lives. He actually estimated it controls about half of our outcomes. Pretty wild for a guy writing 500 years ago. Honestly sounds like something a modern psychologist would say. But here's the part that changes everything. Machiavelli says, the other half, the other 50%, belongs to us. That's virtù. That's your skill, your preparation, your boldness, your ability to adapt when circumstances shift on you without warning. He uses this famous metaphor comparing fortuna to a violent, flooding river. When the river's calm, everybody thinks they're in control. Everybody's chilling by the riverbank without a care in the world. But when that river floods, and it will flood, eventually, guaranteed, that's just how rivers and life both work. It destroys everything in its path if you weren't prepared. Houses get swept away, fields get flooded, chaos everywhere. But, and this is the key insight, a wise ruler, a wise person, builds dams and levees and channels during the calm times, so that when the flood inevitably comes, they've got systems in place to redirect that destructive force instead of getting wiped out by it completely. Translate that into your own life right now. You didn't choose to be broke. Maybe you got laid off. Maybe medical bills wrecked you. Maybe you were born into a family with zero financial head start, zero connections, zero safety net. That's fortuna, that's the flood, and it's not your fault. I need you to hear that clearly. It is not a moral failing to be broke. It's not proof that you're lazy or stupid or less than anybody else. Sometimes the river just floods, and there's nothing you could have done to stop it. But here's where virtù comes in. Here's where your power actually lives. What are you doing right now, in this exact moment, to build your levees? What skills are you sharpening while you're down? What relationships are you nurturing, even when you got nothing material to offer? What small, disciplined actions are you taking every single day that position you to redirect the flood instead of drowning in it? Machiavelli himself, in that farmhouse, couldn't control the fact that the Medici family took power and exiled him. That was fortuna, completely outside his control. But he could control what he did with his time during that exile. He could control whether he spent his nights drinking away his sorrows, or whether he spent them writing a book that would outlive every single person who wronged him by 500 years and counting. That's virtù. That's the 50% that was always his to command. This is the mental shift that separates people who stay poor from people who bounce back from broke. It's not about denying your circumstances or pretending everything's fine when it's not. It's about identifying exactly which parts of your situation you can actually influence, and then pouring every ounce of energy you've got into that 50%, instead of wasting your energy raging against the 50% you never had control over in the first place. Chapter 6. Never reveal your weakness. Here's a cold, calculated piece of Machiavellian wisdom that a lot of people don't want to hear, but it's real, and it works. Never let your enemies, or honestly, even your friends, see the full extent of your weakness. Now don't get it twisted. This ain't about being fake or refusing to ever be vulnerable with people who genuinely love you. Vulnerability with the right people, your real inner circle, is healthy and necessary. We're not knocking that here. What we're talking about is a totally different game. How you present yourself in the wider world, in professional settings, to competitors, to people who don't have your best interest at heart. Machiavelli watched countless rulers across Renaissance Italy get destroyed, not because they were weak, but because they let their weakness become public knowledge. The moment your rivals sense blood in the water, they move in. That's just how the game of power has worked since the beginning of human history, and honestly, it's how the professional and financial world still works today. Think about it in a modern context. If your boss knows you're desperate for this job because you got bills piling up and no backup plan, guess what happens during your next negotiation? You get lowballed, and you accept it, because you can't afford to walk away. If your competitors in business know your company's struggling financially, they'll swoop in and undercut you, steal your clients, wait you out until you fold. If people in your social circle know you're desperate for validation or desperate for connection, some of them, not all, but some, will exploit that desperation for their own gain. This is why Machiavelli emphasized the importance of a ruler maintaining a strong, composed image even during internal crisis. Not because honesty doesn't matter, but because strategic composure protects your leverage. It protects your negotiating position. It protects you from predators who are actively looking for weakness to exploit. So, how do you apply this when you're going through a broke season? Simple. Well, simple to explain, harder to execute, but here's the game plan. Keep your struggles private from people who don't need to know, especially people who could use that information against you. Your boss doesn't need a play-by-play of your financial stress every time you ask for a raise or negotiate terms. Your competitors definitely don't need to know your cash flow is tight this quarter. Random acquaintances on social media don't need front-row seats to your financial anxiety. Instead, project calm, project competence, project the energy of someone who's handling their business, even when internally you're stressed out of your mind. This isn't lying, it's strategic discretion. There's a massive difference between deception and discretion, and Machiavelli understood that difference perfectly. Save your real vulnerability, your real, "I'm struggling right now" conversations, for the small circle of people who've actually earned that trust. Family, real friends, a therapist, a mentor who's got your back. Everybody else gets the composed, capable version of you, because that's the version that protects your opportunities and your leverage. This is exactly what Machiavelli did in his exile. Publicly, to the world, to the Medici family who'd wronged him, he maintained his dignity, kept petitioning for reinstatement through proper channels, never groveled or broadcast his desperation in a way that would have made him look pathetic. Privately, in his letters to close friends like Vittori, he was honest about how brutal the situation felt. That's the balance. That's the move. Chapter 7. Turning nothing into something. Resourcefulness as a weapon. All right, let's talk about resourcefulness, because this might be the single most practical, most actionable lesson buried inside Machiavellian thinking when it comes to bouncing back from having nothing. Machiavelli was obsessed, and I mean genuinely obsessed, with rulers who rose to power from difficult, disadvantaged starting positions using nothing but cunning, adaptability, and sheer resourcefulness. He didn't glorify rulers who inherited everything and coasted. He respected the ones who clawed their way up, using whatever tools were available to them, even when those tools seemed pathetic compared to what their rivals had. Take his fascination with Cesare Borgia, one of the most talked about figures in The Prince. Borgia didn't build his power through some clean, inherited, guaranteed path. He used every available resource: political marriages, calculated violence, shifting alliances, manipulation of public perception, to carve out territory and power in a fractured, chaotic Italy. Machiavelli studied this dude's every move because Borgia represented pure resourcefulness in action, turning whatever situation he found himself in into leverage. Now, obviously, we're not telling you to go be ruthless and cutthroat in some literal Renaissance warlord sense. That's not the point of this video, and let's be real, most of us aren't trying to run a 15th century Italian city-state. But the underlying principle translates directly into how you handle being broke in the modern world. Use every single resource available to you, no matter how small it seems, and stop waiting for the perfect resource to show up before you start moving. Got a skill nobody's paying you for yet? Start using it for free to build a portfolio, build relationships, build proof of concept. Got 2 hours after your day job? That's your window to build something on the side. Got a phone and an internet connection? That's more raw resource than 99% of humans throughout history ever had access to. Got relationships, even weak ones, even people you haven't talked to in years? Reach back out. Resourcefulness means squeezing value out of what's actually in front of you, instead of fantasizing about resources you don't currently have. Here's a mindset shift that'll change your whole trajectory. Stop asking, "What do I need to succeed?" and start asking, "What can I do right now with exactly what I've got?" Because I promise you, the second question always produces more forward motion than the first one. The first question keeps you stuck in a permanent waiting room. The second question puts you in motion immediately. Machiavelli in that farmhouse didn't have access to the royal courts anymore, didn't have his old network of political contacts feeding him inside information daily. But he still had his mind, his memory of everything he'd witnessed over 14 years working in government, his writing skills, and a stack of paper. That's it. That's all he had left. And he used exactly that, nothing more, nothing less, to produce a book that changed the course of political philosophy forever. Resourcefulness isn't about having a lot. It's about maximizing whatever little you've got, refusing to let "I don't have enough" become your final answer, and getting relentlessly creative about combining what's available in ways nobody else thought to combine it. Chapter 8. Building alliances, even when you've got nothing to offer. Let's talk about relationships and alliances, because this is another area where the poor mindset absolutely wrecks people, and it's an area Machiavelli wrote about extensively. When you're going through a rough financial season, there's a temptation to isolate. You feel embarrassed. You feel like you've got nothing to offer anybody. You feel like showing up to social events or networking opportunities is pointless because, what am I even going to say? I got nothing going on. I get it. That shame spiral is real. And honestly, it's one of the most damaging side effects of financial hardship because it cuts you off from the exact resource that could help pull you out: other people. Machiavelli was all about alliances. His entire framework for how rulers maintain and expand power revolves around understanding relationships, knowing who to align with, who to keep at arm's length, who to win over, and how to build a network of support that strengthens your position over time. He didn't believe in going it completely alone. Even the most ruthless, self-sufficient rulers he studied and wrote about relied heavily on strategic alliances to survive and expand their influence. Here's the thing about alliances when you're broke: they don't require money. Let that sink in for a second, because a lot of people think networking or building relationships requires some level of financial status: buying people drinks, attending expensive events, having something material to offer in return. That's a myth, and it's a myth that keeps broke people isolated during the exact period when relationships matter most. What you can offer, even with $0 in your pocket, includes your time, your genuine interest in other people's lives and goals, your skills, even underdeveloped ones, your loyalty, your honesty, your energy, your willingness to show up and help when someone needs a hand. These things are currency too, and honestly, they're often more valuable long-term than money because they build genuine trust instead of transactional relationships. Think about how Machiavelli, even in exile, banned from official politics, kept writing letters to Francesco Vittori, kept the relationship alive, kept discussing ideas and politics and philosophy, even though he had zero official power to offer his friend anymore. That relationship, maintained through nothing but genuine intellectual connection and loyalty, is actually part of how we know so much about his life during this period. Those letters survived, and they're historically priceless. So here's your action step. Don't disappear during your broke season. Stay connected. Show up to that call even if you're embarrassed about your situation. Reach out to old contacts, not to ask for money. That puts people in an awkward position and usually backfires. But to reconnect, to offer help where you can, to keep the relationship warm. Because opportunities almost never come from strangers. They come from people who already know you, already trust you, and happen to hear about something that makes them think, "Oh, I know somebody who'd be perfect for this." Isolation feels safe when you're struggling, but it's actually one of the most dangerous traps you can fall into. Machiavelli understood that power, real, lasting power, is never built alone. Neither is a comeback. Chapter 9. Historical figures who rose from absolute nothing. Let's take a quick detour through history and look at some real examples of people who had nothing, and I mean nothing, and still refused to think poor, still climbed their way to serious power and influence. Because sometimes seeing it in action hits different than just talking theory. Let's start with someone Machiavelli himself studied closely: the concept behind new princes, rulers who came to power not through inheritance, but through their own cunning and effort. starting from disadvantaged positions. Machiavelli argued these self-made rulers, despite facing way harder roads than hereditary princes who inherited stable kingdoms, often ended up being more skilled, more resilient rulers, precisely because they had to fight for every inch of territory and legitimacy. They couldn't coast. They had to outthink, out-hustle, and outmaneuver everybody around them just to survive, let alone thrive. Now think beyond Machiavelli's own era for a second. Throughout history, over and over again, we see this exact pattern repeat. People starting with genuinely nothing, no inheritance, no connections, sometimes not even basic literacy, who refused to accept poor as a permanent identity and clawed their way into positions of massive influence. The pattern's always similar. They didn't wait for circumstances to improve before they started acting like the person they intended to become. They used whatever scraps of resource and opportunity crossed their path with maximum efficiency. They built relationships strategically, even when they had little to offer beyond their word and their work ethic. They kept their composure publicly, even when things were falling apart privately. And critically, this is huge, they never let temporary circumstances convince them that limitation was their permanent identity. This is the through line connecting Machiavelli's own life story to basically every rags-to-power story throughout history. The material circumstances of poverty are real, they're brutal, and we're not going to sit here and pretend hardship doesn't hurt or doesn't create real, legitimate barriers. It absolutely does. But the psychological trap of poverty, the internalized belief that you're permanently less than, permanently limited, permanently stuck, that trap is optional. That trap is a choice, even if it doesn't feel like a choice in the moment. Every single person who's ever climbed out of a rock-bottom situation had to make that mental separation at some point. They had to say, internally, my current situation does not define my future capability. And once that separation happens in your mind, everything else, the resourcefulness, the relationship building, the discipline, the strategic patience, all of it becomes possible. Because you're no longer operating from a place of, I can't, but from a place of, I haven't yet, but I'm working on it. Chapter 10. Strategic Patience, the Long Game. Let's talk about patience, but not the passive, sit around and wait kind of patience. We're talking about Machiavellian patience, strategic, calculated, active patience that positions you for the right moment instead of forcing bad moves out of desperation. One of the biggest mistakes broke people make is trying to solve everything all at once, in one giant, desperate move. You see this all the time. People jumping into sketchy business opportunities because they're desperate for quick cash. People making terrible financial decisions because they can't stand to sit in discomfort for even one more day. People burning bridges by demanding immediate results from relationships or situations that need time to develop. Machiavelli understood that timing is one of the most underrated forces in the game of power. He wrote extensively about how rulers who acted impulsively, who tried to force outcomes before the conditions were right, usually ended up destroying themselves. But rulers who understood how to wait, how to build quietly, how to strike only when the moment was actually ripe, those were the ones who built lasting power instead of flash-in-the-pan success that crumbled just as fast as it appeared. Think about his own comeback story, or attempted comeback, honestly. Machiavelli didn't get his position back through some single dramatic move. He played a long, patient game. He wrote The Prince partly as a strategic gesture, dedicating it to the Medici family, hoping to prove his value and earn his way back into their good graces. It didn't fully work in his lifetime. He never fully regained the political standing he once had, but the patient, strategic approach he took, continuing to write, continuing to build his intellectual reputation, continuing to maintain what relationships he could, eventually did lead to him getting some minor commissions and a slight return to relevance before he passed away in 1527. The lesson here isn't that patience guarantees a perfect outcome. Life doesn't work that way, and Machiavelli's own story proves that even brilliant, patient strategy doesn't always lead to a complete triumphant comeback. But the lesson is that impatience, desperation-driven decision-making, almost always makes your situation worse, not better. When you're broke and thinking poor, everything feels urgent. Everything feels like it needs to be solved right this second. That urgency mindset leads to bad deals, bad partnerships, bad financial decisions, burned relationships, and wasted energy. Strategic patience means you're still moving, still working, still building, but you're not forcing outcomes before they're ready. You're not signing that predatory loan just because you're desperate. You're not jumping into that pyramid scheme because someone promised quick money. You're not burning a valuable relationship by demanding it produce results faster than is realistic. You're playing the long game, putting in consistent work and trusting that consistent virtù, applied over time, eventually intersects with fortuna in your favor. This requires discipline, and honestly, it requires a level of emotional regulation that's genuinely hard to maintain when you're stressed about money. But it's a skill, and like any skill, it gets stronger with practice. Chapter 11. Daily Mindset Practices to Keep You from Thinking Poor. All right, let's get super practical for a minute, because all this philosophy means nothing if you can't actually apply it to your day-to-day life while you're in the trenches of a broke season. Here's a breakdown of daily practices inspired by everything we've covered that'll help keep your mind operating from a place of virtù instead of scarcity. First, maintain your standards, even when nobody's watching. Machiavelli put on those formal robes every single night, alone, in a farmhouse, with nobody there to see him do it. That ritual mattered because it kept his self-image intact. Find your version of that. Make your bed. Dress with intention, even if it's just for yourself. Keep your space clean. These small disciplines send a signal to your own brain that you're still operating at a high standard, regardless of your current circumstances. Second, separate your identity from your bank account, out loud, every single day if you have to. Literally say it to yourself, I am not poor, I am currently in a broke season, and I'm working my way out of it. Sounds simple, maybe even a little corny, but the language you use with yourself shapes the beliefs you hold about yourself, and those beliefs shape your actions. Third, do something every single day, even something small, that builds your virtù. Learn something, reach out to someone, work on a skill, apply to something, pitch something. The goal isn't massive daily breakthroughs, it's consistent motion, because consistent motion compounds over time in ways that feel invisible day to day, but become massive over months and years. Fourth, guard your inner circle carefully. Machiavelli was strategic about who he stayed in contact with, who he shared his real struggles with versus who got the composed, professional version of him. Do the same. Not everybody needs access to your struggles, and not everybody's opinion about your situation deserves real estate in your head. Fifth, study people who came from nothing and built something. This isn't about comparison in a way that makes you feel worse. It's about proof of concept. Every single person who's ever climbed out of a rock-bottom situation is proof that it's possible. Let that proof fuel you instead of letting your current circumstances convince you that you're the exception who can't make it out. Sixth, practice strategic patience daily by pausing before big decisions, especially decisions driven by desperation or fear. Ask yourself, am I making this move because it's genuinely smart or because I'm just desperate for this discomfort to end? That single question will save you from a huge number of bad decisions. Seventh, track your resourcefulness wins, no matter how small. Did you figure out a way to make something work with limited resources this week? Write it down. These small wins build evidence, real, tangible evidence, that you're capable, that you're resourceful, that you're not stuck, and that evidence becomes ammunition against the poor mindset when it tries to creep back in. Chapter 12. Breaking free from victim mentality. We got to address this directly, because it's one of the most dangerous traps connected to thinking poor, and that's victim mentality. Now listen, I want to be really careful here, because there's a difference between acknowledging real injustice, real hardship, real systems that make things harder for certain people, and getting stuck in a mental loop where you use those injustices as a permanent excuse to stop moving forward. Both things can be true at once. Life can genuinely be unfair to you, and you can still be the one responsible for what you do next. Machiavelli got royally screwed by the political system of his time. Falsely accused, tortured, exiled, cut off from the career he'd spent over a decade building. He had every legitimate right to sit around being bitter about it for the rest of his life. Instead, he channeled that experience into arguably the most influential political text ever written. He didn't pretend the injustice didn't happen. His letters show he was clearly frustrated and hurt by it. But he didn't let that injustice become his final chapter either. Victim mentality convinces you that because bad things happen to you, and sometimes truly bad, truly unfair things, you're therefore exempt from having to do the hard work of building yourself back up. It feels comforting in a weird way because it removes responsibility. If it's not your fault, then it's not on you to fix it, right? But that logic, while emotionally understandable, is a dead end. It keeps you stuck exactly where you are, waiting for an apology or a correction from the universe that's probably never coming. Here's the harder truth, and it's one Machiavelli's own life demonstrates perfectly. It's not your fault that you got knocked down, but it is your responsibility to get back up. Those are two completely separate things, and conflating them is where a lot of people get stuck for years, sometimes decades. Breaking free from victim mentality doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending everything's fine. It means fully feeling the frustration, the grief, the anger about your circumstances, if that's what's genuinely there. And then, after processing that, making the conscious decision to pick up the pen, metaphorically speaking, and start writing your own comeback story instead of waiting for someone else to write it for you. Chapter 13. Final Machiavellian Principles for a Wealth Mindset. Let's bring it all together with some final, distilled principles pulled directly from everything we've covered. Principles you can carry with you long after this video ends. Principle 1. Your bank account is a temporary condition, not a permanent identity. Broke is a season. Poor is a mindset you choose to reject, starting right now. Principle 2. You control roughly half the equation: your virtù, your skill, your effort, your preparation. The other half, fortuna, is outside your control, and wasting energy raging against it is wasted energy, period. Principle 3. How you present yourself shapes how the world treats you. Composure, dignity, and strategic discretion protect your leverage far better than broadcasting desperation ever will. Principle 4. Resourcefulness beats resources every single time. Use exactly what you've got, right now, instead of waiting for perfect conditions that may never arrive. Principle 5. Relationships are currency, even, especially, when you've got $0. Stay connected, show up. Build alliances through loyalty and genuine value, not just money. Principle 6. Strategic patience beats desperate urgency. Play the long game. Don't force outcomes before the conditions are ripe. Principle 7. Your circumstances are not always your fault, but your comeback is always your responsibility. Feel what you need to feel, then pick up the pen and start writing the next chapter yourself. Machiavelli sat in a broke-down farmhouse, tortured, exiled, humiliated by people who once respected him, and instead of accepting that as his final story, he produced work that's still shaping how the world thinks about power 5 centuries later. That's the power of refusing to think poor, even when you've got nothing. That's the mindset shift that turns broke seasons into legendary comeback stories. You are not your bank account. You are not your current job title. You are not the sum of your worst financial moments. You are the mind behind all of it, and that mind, if you train it right, if you feed it the right principles, is more valuable than any amount of money that's ever passed through your hands or ever will. And that right there is the mindset that turned a broke, exiled, tortured political outcast into one of the most legendary minds in human history. Let that sink in for a second before you go about the rest of your day, because I promise you, if you actually apply even half of what we broke down in this video, your relationship with money, with hardship, with your own self-worth is going to shift in a real, tangible way. Real talk, if this video added value to your life, if it shifted something in your head even a little bit, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel grow and helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. Drop a comment down below. Tell me which principle from this video hit you the hardest. Tell me about a time you had to refuse to think poor even when things were rough. I promise you I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories. If you know somebody going through a tough financial season right now, somebody who needs this exact message today, do them a favor and share this video with them. It might be exactly what flips the switch in their head. And if you're new here, welcome to the family. Smash that subscribe button because the Hidden Mind drops content just like this, breaking down the sharpest, most powerful lessons from history's greatest and most ruthless thinkers, and applying it directly to your modern life, your money, your mindset, your comeback story. For those of you who really want to support what we're building here, there's a super thanks option right below this video. Every bit of support goes directly toward making this channel bigger, better, and more consistent for all of you. Until next time, remember, you can be broke, you can have nothing in your pocket right now, but the second you let that convince you that you're poor, that's the second you actually lose. Keep your standards high, keep your mind sharp, keep playing the long game, and I promise you, your comeback is closer than you think. This has been The Hidden Mind. Stay sharp, stay hungry, and I'll see you in the next one.